Thank you so much for being here. I'm Somini Sengupta. I'm the international climate correspondent for the New York Times and also the lead writer for the Climate Forward newsletter. Let me remind you that the way to sign up for the newsletter is nytimes.com/climateforward. Easy peasy. So I want to welcome you to this, what I hope will be a riveting debate, a tough debate. There's little doubt that climate change punishes those who are least responsible for the source of the problem. People living mainly in countries in the global south who are responsible for a relatively small share of global greenhouse emissions. So are they owed anything for the losses they are already suffering? Losses of land, livelihoods, cultural heritage. You might think of this as reparations, but in the polite language of international diplomatic negotiations, it's not called that. The R word is not used. It's known as a mechanism for loss and damage. But even that remains one of the most contentious issues in international climate negotiations. There's no agreement on what to do. There's only an agreement to talk about it. It was a big fault line. A mechanism for loss and damage was a big fault line during COP26, which I covered in Glasgow. It will no doubt be a big fault line for COP27 later this year. And the demands for loss and damage money, because it's really a demand for money, has become more urgent and more intense because losses and damages have become more frequent and more severe. So to help us really think critically about these issues are a panel of expert debaters. I want to invite the debaters to come on to the stage, and then I will introduce our judges for the afternoon. The motion is, this House believes there can be no societal transformation without climate reparations. Arguing for the motion, we have Isabel Hilton, founder and editor of the news site China Dialogue. Isabel, please join me here. Elizabeth Chege, chairperson of the Africa Regional Network of the World Green Building Council. Welcome, Elizabeth. Joining us virtually, Esther Stanford Koze, a legal expert who consults governments on the issue of reparations. Now, for our team against, welcome, Esther. For our team against the motion, we have joining us here, Claire Sakya. Claire is the director of the Climate Change Research Group for the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED. Welcome. Sean Kidney, the Chief Executive Officer of Climate Bonds Initiative, a nonprofit that advises financial institutions. Joining us virtually against the motion, Edna Odhiambo, a lawyer. Welcome. Welcome to those of you who are here in person. Welcome to those of you who are joining virtually. We also have two esteemed judges, Jeremy Oppenheim, founder of Systemic, and James Mwangi, founder of the Climate Action Platform for Africa. We'll be hearing from both of you in a bit. So here's how the debate works, and you know this if you've listened to the other debates. I'll be calling on both teams of debaters, 3 on each side. In pairs, they will come to the podium, either physically or virtually. After we have heard from all 6, our judges will come up to offer some feedback, some constructive commentary. And then, based on the judges' feedback, the teams will go back, consult amongst themselves, and come up with their closing remarks. And finally, after those closing arguments, we will close with some additional reflections from the judges, and then we'll have a very scientific method of gauging which side kind of grabbed the audience, and we're going to be measuring your applause. So this is an exercise in active listening and rigorous debate, something I feel as a journalist we should have just more and more of. So I'm going to introduce the first two debaters. You each have 3 minutes to make your case. For the for side, for the motion, Elizabeth Chege, Chair of the Africa Regional Network of the Green Building Council. And for the against side, joining us virtually, Edna Odhiambo on the screen. So please, Elizabeth and Edna, your 3 minutes begin.
Thank you very much. Visualize Africa. It's a continent, not a country. First of all, when we consider loss and damage, a lot of the times we put the money towards the built environment. But how much is the cost of one life, one vulnerable community? We don't know, do we? Or I'd like to see today as putting that amount of money. Africa itself, in its true size, China can fit in Africa, India, most of Europe, and the small island states as well, and USA. Think about all the opportunities those countries have had over the 100 years. Africa, on average, is 50 years. But why do we ask on this opportunity around loss and damage if we should actually have climate reparations? By 2050, Africa will be home to 1.3 billion more people than today. With more than half of the world's population rising to that amount of people. We have 70% of the youth in Africa. It is not a matter of begging for money. It's not a matter of being saved. If you consider from colonial times to the point where we are, there is opportunity in Africa. So loss and damage is not a negative element of discussion. It's a matter of forward thinking. By 2100, the population will be equivalent to 2 Chinas and 1 India. At the moment, over 600 million people are at risk in Africa due to high temperatures. But when we think about high temperatures, we consider cooling, but because we are privileged to have cooling. How about the vaccines? How about the pandemic? We couldn't even keep the vaccines. We lost so many coming to Africa. Food. How do we chill the food? From agriculture to the cities. We lose 60% of our food day in, day out, as we speak today. So it's not a matter of reparation. It's a matter of actual sense of moving forward together in solidarity. Take Nigeria, for example. Access to electricity is 57%. What does that mean in healthcare? We lose children and mothers every day. Every time the lights go off, incubators go off. So it's not a matter of human need, but dignity, the kind of survival life that we need. And lastly, 1.2 billion people are at risk globally. So we might think about the vulnerable communities, but it's about yourselves as well. Climate knows no boundaries. Thank you.
Edna, against the motion, please.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. We acknowledge that while it is important to address historical climate injustices compounded by legacies of colonialism and racism, societal transformation cannot be hinged on reparations. Reparations will not be the vehicle that will attain long-term benefits for people and the planet. In fact, constructing societal transformation on reparation risks sealing a fate of victimhood for developing countries and entrenching paternalism in climate dialogues. So today, I would like to talk about how we can achieve long-term benefits, which are entrenched on systems change and empowerment. When we talk about this amazing African continent, which has numerous people and countries and other developing countries, are we saying that the only thing they have to offer is their vulnerability and not their capability as solution providers to the climate crisis. After all, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And that is why we must seek systems that anchor empowerment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we must agree on one thing today, that the climate crisis is urgent. That is not in contention. In fact, I'm sure we are all here because we believe in that urgency. Scientists have told us of the untold suffering that awaits humanity. So we do not have the luxury of time. 13 years ago, developed countries pledged $100 billion a year in Copenhagen to support developing countries in the form of climate finance to tackle the impacts of the climate crisis because of their historical contribution. 13 years. Do we have another 13 years to board this slow vehicle called reparations? We must begin to tackle root causes, which can then address societal transformation. And by that, let us talk about the root cause of climate change. 92% of global emissions are from developed countries. Top 10 countries out of these constitute 69% of global emissions. Let me tell you that real societal transformation will begin when these countries break their addiction to fossil fuels, when these countries are willing to suffer the inconvenience of abandoning consumptive lifestyles and are willing to undertake climate action in their own soil. Paying to pollute mechanisms in the form of dodgy carbon offsets, renewable energy projects established in developing countries so as to maintain business as usual approaches, greenwashing in corporate areas. These are the difficult questions that we must talk about if indeed we want to achieve societal transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, if the US Supreme Court can rule 6-3 to limit some of the powers of the Environmental Protection Agency to curb emissions in the world's second largest emitter, then we have a long way to go to address root causes of climate action. Otherwise, it's as if we are pouring water into a bucket with holes. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you, round one debaters. Round two debaters, you are up. For the motion, Isabel Hilton, please come up. And against the motion, also here in person, Claire Sakya, please come up. 3 minutes, and please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to make essentially 2 points in support of this case. The first is the moral point, and it's really pretty simple. Global North, us, we're responsible for 92% of the excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We, in the Global North, created the global warming that's bringing catastrophe to vulnerable peoples of the Global South and will eventually bring catastrophe to all of us. And what's more, we grew rather rich by doing it. And since we are richer, we have an overwhelming moral obligation to spend some of that carbon wealth to help vulnerable countries cope with the damage we have inflicted on them, to help them adapt, and importantly, to help them build their own low-carbon energy systems, which urgently need investment, which can best come from us. Now, this is the Conduit Club, and since we're all very nice people in the Conduit Club, I could probably stop there with the moral case, but just in case someone has crept in from another club, I'm also going to point out that we have overwhelming self-interest in compensating for loss and damage. So what's the self-interest case? Well, I believe you need 2 things. You need a lot of things, but 2 are essential to tackle climate change. One is political will, and the other is money. We have the technology, we understand the science. Keeping global average temperature rise below 1.5, the Paris target, means we have to bend the emissions curve by 2030, and after that it gets much harder. But look around you. if you're trying to summon political will, even before Putin invaded Ukraine, global distraction was at very high levels. We had COVID, we had inflation, we have a cost of living crisis, food security, energy security, geopolitical confrontation. We are seriously distracted. We're trying to do something very big in a very short time, not because it's fun or easy, but because we want to survive as a species. And flawed though the United Nations process is, it is essential to that ambition. And for that to function, we have to bring everybody along with us. The events that I have listed have absorbed the political attention and the money that we need for climate change. So we need to do what we can to stabilize the world, including the vulnerable countries who are essential members of the global community, of the United Nations, and of this process. And that's why we need to finance for loss and damage. It would have tangible security benefits, given the overlap between countries that are the most vulnerable to climate impacts and those that have a high risk of conflict. So countries in Africa, the Middle East, the Caribbean. These are countries in which we all have a strategic interest. If they can't manage the impacts of climate disasters, other political systems, their political systems, will not survive. Their people will migrate. There will be further escalating tensions between target countries and countries that are producing migrants. So it is in our economic interests. Addressing loss and damage is essential for sustainable development, and that is essential for global prosperity, and both of those are essential for climate change.
So far we've had promises of finance of all sorts for climate change. We've got promised this 100 billion, it still hasn't arrived. And one of the reasons it's not flowing is because the countries that need it are being asked to provide a climate rationale. Imagine if that was being required for this reparations and that was the only finance. It lets everyone off the hook. If they have to prove that the impact that they've experienced is because of climate impacts, we're going to be sitting around waiting for this money to flow forever. We're already having so many barriers to accessing the Green Climate Fund. So I would say we have to change the argument. We have to focus on shifting society at the scale and pace that is needed, using every single tool in the toolbox, not waiting for one type of finance to solve our problems. We need risk-tolerant finance, and we're not going to get that if we're calling it reparations. We know from the Green Climate Fund experience that designing new funds under political headlights means that they become incredibly risk-averse. We are not going to get what we need from the Green Climate Fund because of the politics around it. So we have to make sure that development finance, private finance, domestic finance, the communities that are suffering impacts are already using their own finance to survive. We need to be helping them, so we should try and use the full range of tools. So if, as we know, that locally led action on climate, nature, and on poverty needs to be done coherently at the same time, we need to be looking at a new type of partnership, leaning in and having it all around solidarity, getting all the actors around the same table and innovating to resolve the challenges we're facing right now. The courts may well give us the price of what it's worth to provide reparations for certain impacts, for certain large events, but they're never going to give us a sense of, for the very poorest people who don't have assets because they're so poor, their financial losses are not going to be counted their losses are not going to be counted in money. It is about well-being, and that we're not going to get from reparations. So, given we need to use every aspect, every tool in the box, every type of finance. So yes, insurance is needed. Yes, development finance is needed. Yes, some court payouts might come about, but we also need the sort of instant finance when an event occurs that comes with a loan, perhaps, or contingency finance to respond, pre-position finance, knowing that a certain event is likely to happen in the near term. And we need to be responding at the pace and scale of the impacts of climate change. So framing this around solidarity and framing it around partnerships that lean into risk and come with all tools and innovation at the very front and centre to try and shift development pathways as fast as they're needed is, I would say, what we should be looking for.
Thank you for that. Just as a reminder, the motion is there can be no societal transformation without climate reparations. So, third round of debaters for the motion. Joining us virtually, Esther Stanford-Koze. Against the motion, Sean Kidney. 4 goes up first, please. But please join us on the podium. Esther, please begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I'm definitely supporting this motion that there can be no societal transformation without climate reparations. But first of all, I'd like to just emphasize that climate reparations to me are an aspect of holistic reparations. And holistic reparations are about stopping harm, stopping the harms of the extractive industries which are prolonging and advancing the worldwide climate and ecological crisis, and then how do we repair the damage? Climate reparations cannot simply be reduced to finance and money, because ultimately, as has already been said by previous speakers, that this crisis that we're in didn't begin yesterday. Its origins began with colonialism, with the enslavement and dispossession of peoples, African peoples, Asian peoples, indigenous peoples of the earth, and that continues to this day. And so if we're just looking with current modern day eyes, we're not going to see the root of this crisis, polycrisis that we're in, and then we're going to come to the wrong solutions, which are very reductive and often in terms of climate reparations seem to start and end with money. Reparationists, like myself from the International Social Movement for African Reparations, really resent the way in which climate reparations has been NGOized and actually divorced from the liberation potential of many reparations movements, which we call things by different names, but actually reparations are not about victimhood. Reparations are about restoration, restitution, restoring a people's agency and self-determination, land back. If we were to actually have a policy of land back, we know that despite being only 5% of the world's population, indigenous peoples control the lands and protect 80% of Earth's biodiversity. So true climate reparations can only be effected in terms of planet repair. This is about recognizing the harm that's been done to people, but also the harm that people have been doing to our Mother Earth, that which sustains all life. And planet repairs really is this nexus between reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice. And the lenses that we're using to address this problem are coming from the same thinking that caused it. And so what we need is widespread societal transformation, which can only happen with holistic reparations, of which the climate is only part. And that is what our movements are seeking. And to us, it is about ensuring that we engage in transformative adaptations, that it's not just about handing monies to governments, it's also about recognizing that communities have to be the change. Peoples are the change. They are being the change in the global south, in Africa. And if we just have a simplistic notion of handing money to governments, when some of these governments, because of neo-colonialism, are actually reinforcing the same models of maldevelopment and dispossessing their own people. So let's think more broadly, let's think more systemically, let's be more courageous. And for us, it's about creating a multipolar world of global justice where we can have a fair redistribution of wealth and resources for all, so that we put the power back into the hands of the peoples and not the greedy multinational corporations engaged in greenwashing and actually neo-colonial governments. Thank you.
Time is up.
Isabel said, survive as a species. And that's the thing we have to remember here. We have a freight train coming down the track towards us. we're fooling around on the tracks. That freight train is climate change. We have the beginnings of that impact right now. We have heat. We have war. There's a petrostate war going across on the other side of Europe, fueled by European fossil fuel money. We have a famine beginning in parts of the world thanks to the impacts of a fossil fuel war and climate change. We've had a pandemic as a result of the collapse of biodiversity. We are beginning to experience what will be the defining features of the 21st century: war, famine, and pandemic. It's happening. The freight train is actually hitting us now. Reparations are not the dependency. Action on climate change is the dependency. You heard earlier from speakers on both sides, 92% of emissions are in rich countries. It's rich countries that have to change. We have to get off fossil fuels, and fast. We have to get out of those damned SUVs using petrol. Okay, I can live with electric for a bit longer, but actually there's more to be done in the transport sector. We need to stop shipping clothes from Bangladesh to our shops in London using fossil fuel-rich ships. It is our consumption driving this. It's everything. It's water too. Did you know that 7% of the world's electricity is used to pump water around? And where is that happening? That's in the places with water. That's the rich countries of the world. To be able to get off the tracks in time, to avoid the worst of climate change, and don't get me wrong, we've got war, famine and pandemic baked into the system now. To avoid the catastrophic climate change, we have to change in the rich world. We need to get rid of those emissions and transform our economies, societies. We can transform without reparations. We can do what's required to stop being hit by the train without reparations. Of course, we can do better with reparations. We can choose a world of justice. We can choose a world of healing. We can choose a world that is better than the lesser world of just getting off fossil fuels. It's not a dependency. It's a choice within our grasp.
Thank you very much to the debaters for those wide-ranging, very thoughtful, very powerful arguments. I'd like to invite our judges to please join me at the lectern. I wonder, what did you hear that surprised you? What did you not hear? What would you like for each side to consider when they come back for their closing argument? So, Jeremy Oppenheim, James Mwangi, please come.
Right. Well, that was quite the storm, as it should be, because it's a huge issue. Let me just say a couple of things. One is what I discovered in listening actively to the group was that there is actually a lot of common ground. Right. So, notwithstanding the setup of a debate, both sides, I think, were agreeing on the fact that if you want to, there's a blame, right, responsibility that sits predominantly in the north, 93% of historic emissions. There was, I think, strong agreement actually across both sides that this is about investing in a better and different future. And there was strong agreement about the need for a holistic approach. Taking a reductionist, narrow view of reparations isn't going to get us anywhere. And I think both sides said that. So then what does that tell us about the state of the debate? And let me offer just one reflection to both sides. I think for the side that was arguing for the debate, notwithstanding the emotion and the energy and the morality and the self-interest, I didn't actually hear a proposition around how to shift the politics. I think we all understand the case for justice, right, at a high level. But what does that actually mean in terms of, if you will, a transformational approach to the political system that would be needed to underpin the social transformation. I didn't hear how reparations would enable the political transformation to take place. And for those that were arguing against the motion, what I struggled with was that the case was made elegantly, as ever, right? That one could transform the world without the need for reparations. But I didn't actually hear how that transformation would take place. Yes, there are multiple financial instruments, and yes, we can make choices, but the truth is that we haven't made the choices so far. And so just as in the case for the motion, there was a lack of, if you will, a political proposition, I think there wasn't a strong enough and coherent enough political proposition for those that wanted to argue against the motion. Let me stop there.
I think I agree with your observation, Jeremy, of a lot of common ground, and I also agree with your observations about both cases. I would add two things, just with an interest in time. Firstly, for those arguing in favor of the motion, in addition to the question of how to actually make this happen, I think there was a question left in my mind is what would we spend these resources on? And so there is the point made repeatedly that, yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the global south, but I think a lot of work would probably need to go into, and I'd want to hear some clarity on how does this, and it was alluded to in some of the points, this transfer, how do we route that transfer for the best possible impact for the planet and for the people it's targeted at? Is the delivery mechanism governments? Is it communities? Is it societies? And what complications exist in these societies, which we already recognize, that may mean that the result we're hoping for may not happen, even if we solve that first question of getting this to be a politically palatable transfer. On the flip side, there was a lot of recognition that the global north has created this challenge and needs to take responsibility. I think my fellow judge makes a good point. Well, what's going to change now that's going to get those SUVs off the road that hasn't happened already? Well, maybe the electric car revolution, but repeat that across many, many spaces. But an unintended consequence of the argument that you're making is to strip a large chunk of the global population of the future, because the places facing the impacts and expecting reparations are also the places with the young population that will own the bulk of this new century, is to strip them of any agency in the planet that they will live in. What is their role in actually responding to and managing the climate crisis rather than just being subject to its impacts? So is there something there around not just, well, we made the mess, let's stop emitting more? There's also quite a lot of work to be done. And how do we mobilize these places in a productive exchange in addition? And again, not taking anything away from the point around the political feasibility of actually driving the change you're hoping for. And then maybe also how do you deal with the other political outcome of not dealing in reparations, which is the disruption from those countries demanding it and essentially the breakdown of the global political system as a result. So there's those two feasibility questions that I think sit with me in both instances.
Okay. That's really constructive feedback. Thank you for that, judges. We're now going to give the debaters, both sides, a chance to reflect on what they have heard from each other and from the judges and prepare their final rebuttal. While they do that, you can also reflect and chat amongst yourselves, but we're going to play a video for you and we'll come back in a bit for closing arguments and the judges' final remarks.
La laguna ahorita está mal, mala condición, súper malo. ¿Dónde sacar un producto pues para dar a los niños alimentos? Todo está destruido.
Lorenzo Castro is a community leader whose family has lived in the region for generations.
Hasta yo tengo miedo de estar aquí, porque cada huracán pasa, siempre pega aquí. Entonces, tenemos un plan de salir mejor un poquito más adentro. Tal vez allá nos ayuda un poquito.
Castro and other leaders have identified a tract of land suitable for resettlement, located a few miles inland along the canal. And having surveyed the damage, researchers agree that moving inland is the safe course of action.
El criterio técnico se debería reubicar la comunidad un poco más alejado de la línea costera, un poco más altos, donde haya una mayor protección contra los huracanes, en contra de las inundaciones, de barreras naturales.
But moving inland, while safer from hurricanes, comes with a price. It would mean abandoning a cultural way of life by the sea and taking up farming. That's a change many aren't ready to make. Not yet.
Toda la gente que son de aquí prefieren quedarse aquí. Si quieren llevar a un lugar que está lejos del mar, no se van.
While scientists and community leaders can advise, in the end, it's up to the residents to decide where or if they want to go. For now, most are surviving with donated food and fishing supplies, hoping for government assistance, and building temporary shacks where their houses once stood.
Pero la gente que está haciendo sus champas son provisionales o cómo están?
Sí, son provisionales. Ellos están conscientes que tienen que mover de estos terrenos que podremos decir que el viejo alover, el alover antes.
A number of families, about 60 of the 300 or so, have already decided to move to the safer inland location. In the meantime, everyone is salvaging what they can of their former lives.
Estamos buscando los restos de mi papá, que se murió hace 4 años. Los huesos, los que quedaron, pues. Sentimos que el alma está perdido, pues que anda buscando su lugar en donde descansar.
El cambio climático es para todos, pero a todos no nos golpea por igual. A las comunidades más pobres, las más aisladas, son los que reciben el embate más grande de las consecuencias del cambio climático. Pero el mundo no agarra conciencia también.
Okay. Teams, please wrap up your huddles. And, all right, teams are wrapping up their huddles. For those of you who watched that video, those are my colleagues bearing witness to the actual impacts of climate change. And that's what we do. That's our job as journalists for the New York Times. So here's my plug for you an invitation for you to subscribe if you don't, and subscribe in particular if you're interested in these issues to our newsletter, nytimes.com/climateforward. Okay, teams, are we ready? Are we ready? So you will each have 2 minutes to make your final rebuttal. Have you chosen who will present on your behalf? Please come. Team, have you chosen who will present on your behalf?
No, we're having a deep agony over here. There's someone in Nairobi we're trying to telepath towards to try and get
Yes.
involved.
Okay. Flip a coin, and please choose who will appear. All right, take it away. First, Isabel.
Well, first of all, thank you to fellow debaters and to the judges for their very, I thought, perceptive remarks, and I agree with quite a lot of it. I have to say, though, that one of the issues in this debate, and perhaps one of the reasons why there is so much agreement across the rather narrow aisle, is that it's framed in a rather global north way. It's framed as though climate reparations were acts of charity. The way that climate reparations are really discussed in the climate business is not an act of charity. Yes, there is a moral driver to it, but it is, for reasons that I outlined in my first remarks, it's also a self-interested argument. And the question has been, what are the obstacles to the transfers, to the financing of adaptation and of clean development in vulnerable countries which don't have access to finance? What are the obstacles that have stopped that promised 100 billion a year from ever being delivered in full? And why can't we transform our attitude to that? Why can't we produce the combination of public and private finance, remove the barriers, and actually give them what they need to do what they want to do? And where should that money go? It should go to the communities who already know what they need to do. They know whether they need to defend themselves against climate impacts. They know whether they need to build clean development. We want them to develop cleanly, not the way we did, not the way China did. China doubled its emissions in 10 years, between 2000 and 2010. Very successful development, catastrophic for the climate. We can't afford for that to happen again, for that not to happen again. We have to finance clean development in countries that deserve better standards of living, in countries that need greater resilience, in countries that need the capacity to adapt. That's what we need to do. So it's that model of development. It's not just, it's not charity. And there is a political proposition. The political proposition is to recognize our self-interest, to stop talking about it in ways that scare the taxpayers of rich countries who think they're being asked to give away money they can't afford into a black hole. That's not what we are talking about. Communities are already acting. The value of indigenous communities has already been recognized, and the knowledge and their protection of nature has been recognized by the United Nations.
For the motion, you're at
we
time.
need to open up intellectually to them, and we need to stop doing what has been defined as madness, which is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different solution. We need to change.
We do need to change. We, especially in this room, need to change. I'm not convinced that the villages in the country I was born in, Vanuatu, need to change. That's where I come from. Life is good. We need to ensure that the world that allows them to live their lives and continue their lives can exist. And at the moment, we have a problem. We have a dependency. This debate was about dependencies. It wasn't about one or the other being right or wrong. It was about what is the critical pathway going forward. And with due respect, Jeremy, we weren't asked to talk about how to solve the problem, even though I appreciate your desire to have an answer. We had 2.5 minutes on dependencies each. However, is the answer to give the money to communities in the long run? But in the short run, no, that will not get us off the freight tracks. There are 100 companies that could change the world. If they change, we have time to do that. If they don't change, we are stuffed. We are dead. Understand the nature of the urgency we face. We have 3 things we have to do. One is we need to be clear about what we need to do. We need laser-like focus on the changes that need to be done in the next 7 years, not in the next 10, not in the next 20, not in the next 40. We have a very short time frame to act. We need to focus on the areas that will change things fast to give us a chance. One, that will require us to then shift everything to green in areas where it's currently brown. Investment, rules of government, European Central Bank quantitative easing, etc. But it's focused on those top 100 companies to buy us time to do the third thing. The third thing we have to do, which is really critical, we have to imagine a different future. We have to work on a different future. And here we're in accord. We have to make sure that our friends in Vanuatu, where I come from, or other countries leapfrog past the mistakes we have made, as you so eloquently said. We have to ensure that we choose healing, that we choose truth, that we choose justice. But understand this, it's not a dependency, it's a choice. I will argue a choice we must make for a better world. But right now, the dependency is survival.
Thank you. Okay, this is where you, the audience, come in. Take a moment. Maybe just chat amongst yourselves. Introduce yourselves to a neighbor you don't know. And please tell us, show us, which side has, I don't know, changed your mind? Right? This is less about winning and losing. It's about which side has persuaded you. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and then we'll have the applauso meter. Judges, Jeremy and James, please help us gauge the applausometer. Okay. Can we have a show of support for the team which argued for the motion? For the motion says that was very loud. Yes. Can we have a show of support for the team that argued against the motion? We can do that one more time. That is rather inconclusive, but I do applaud your generosity in listening. Okay, one more time. For the motion, please, a show of applause. Against the motion, a show of applause. Jeremy and James.
Can it be a score draw? Is that allowed?
Yeah, it's really hard to call because they're differently distributed. So one sounds louder because we're sitting near. The hardcore against the motion heartlands are near the judges.
But I think there was a kind of heart in one part of the room and a head in the other part of the room. That's how it felt.
That's well put. Sophie.
It's a draw.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for listening so well. And thank you to our debaters on both sides and to our judges. Thank you all.